People who try to understand with consciousness, or rather to study through consciousness how consciousness works, run into the difficulty of studying the brain. While consciousness is as if hidden in this brain, but the brain, as we already said, is a material structure, while consciousness is not matter as such.
Well, yes, and it turns out that the study doesn't go beyond understanding of three-dimensionality and visible matter. Some kind of stupor just arises, stupor from consciousness. There are limits, and science is afraid to cross over this Rubicon. Nowadays, more and more researchers come to an understanding that consciousness is non-material, and it is not in the brain. But the very word non-material today sounds like a stigma of the word unscientific. That is why scientists are afraid of crossing this line, beyond which, as they believe, metaphysics and the supernatural begin.
For a better understanding, in the modern world we should perhaps turn to quantum mechanics. As of today, is the only field that at least somehow explains that there is something supernatural, I would put it this way. Unfortunately, science has not yet come to an understanding that there is something beyond matter. But in any case, quantum mechanics already comes close and gives an experimentally confirmed explanation of the fact that there is something beyond the limits of the physics we are accustomed to. If we speak of quantum mechanics, then perhaps we should start a little bit with the history of quantum mechanics. What quantum mechanics is, how it emerged and what difficulties it faced. Basically, people can learn from any textbook how it emerged. As of today, much is written there about it. While here, I would like to touch upon those points which are at least somewhat known to people nowadays, precisely that which borders understanding and lack of understanding. Speaking of quantum mechanics, we should emphasize that all matter is subject to the laws of quantum mechanics, starting with galaxies and ending with a teardrop on a baby's cheek. Because all matter is made up of tiny particles, if we delve deeper into the world of matter, delve beyond the atomic and then subatomic limit, we will see that there are tiny particles. We already talked about this more than once, that all matter is composed of tiny particles, practically indivisible ones. As it is believed nowadays, although they are actually divisible, we will try to explain this a little bit. These particles form every atom in this world. The laws governing these particles at the quantum level radically differ from those laws which people are accustomed to in their everyday life, meaning a stone that is thrown up falls down and so on. Well, and all kinds of interactions that take place at the micro level have been more or less studied. Let's take for instance quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement as such implies that two particles may get entangled with each other if they are located close to one another, thus appearing at the same time and being close to each other. They have a certain correlation with one another. In such a case, their properties become interrelated, meaning if these particles are separated and sent, for example, to different corners of the universe, these particles will still remain inseparably connected, and they will continue interacting with each other without loss of time at that. There will be no energy correlations between them, I mean those that could be noticed.
Meaning correlations that could be recorded.
Yes, nevertheless, they will still be connected with each other, and their spins, meaning their rotations, will remain different from one another, and if, for example, a spin of one particle rotates to the left, the spin of the other one will rotate to the right. If we change the spin, meaning the rotation of one particle, this will be immediately automatically reflected on the other particle, no matter at what distance they are located from each other. Moreover, it will happen instantaneously without loss of time, despite enormous distances between them, which violates all the laws that modern physics operates with. That is why, for example, Albert Einstein called such a correlation between entangled particles supernatural, and certainly he immediately began to deny it. However, a Dutch physicist, Niels Bohr, along with like-minded colleagues, on the contrary, asserted that this wonderful interconnection did exist, even though in spite of this assertion, he was unable to prove the existence of such interconnection experimentally. This was more of a theoretical development, but then again, even theoretically, Bohr explained this correlation in a very creative safe way, using the example of two rotating wheels. Well, in order to make it more clear, let us clarify his example. Let's take, for instance, two wheels that are painted with stripes of different colors, red and blue, with a fixed arrow. Bohr explained that if these wheels were taken to opposite ends of the universe and spun, if upon stopping the wheels a red color comes up on one of them, then blue will immediately come up on the other one. Naturally, such declarations by Bohr about this kind of instantaneous correlation between entangled particles ruined the theory which had brought so much fame to Einstein, to which the latter reacted quite painfully, and to refute Bohr's theory, he put forward his own, completely material theory of an alleged interconnection between entangled particles, which eliminated any kind of magic. Einstein explained their correlation by means of a pair of gloves, giving the most commonplace simple example. He explained that if we go and place gloves into two small boxes, for example, or two little drawers, we don't know which glove is in which box. We keep one box and we send the other one, for example, to the other side of the world. When we open the box, we see that we have, for instance, the right glove. This automatically means that the left glove will be in the other box which we have sent to the other side of the world. Well, he explained this well enough, but he forgot to mention that quantum physics also implies the presence of another fact, that glove which will be far from us must also be turned inside out. Not only be the left one, but also be inside out. And if we take the one that we have and start turning it inside out, then at the same time, the other glove, the one on the other side of the world, will also begin to turn inside out. But this would ruin the carefully designed material model of Einstein himself, which he built, and by which he explained everything so easily. Therefore, he kept quiet about it.
Yes, pridefulness still lives in people.
This widely promoted explanation that he gave basically completely satisfied the community of people who were interested in physics and physicists who agree with him. But Einstein's glove theory, which only pointed out the fact that entangled particles are initially different, and that's all, didn't satisfy true physicists, since it didn't explain the particles' correlation, which, strictly speaking, Einstein and his group deliberately kept quiet about, because they couldn't rebuff all of that either.
They kept quiet, which means they knew something.
Theoretically, they certainly understood that it is so, but this would have again suggested that there exists some other correlation, and this would have called Einstein's words into question. Meanwhile, having admitted that this correlation exists, this would have called into question his theory, which was put forward, so to say, in contrast to the theory of ether. Since something like that exists, hence there is ether as well. Since there is ether, this means free energy exists too, and so Tesla was right. But if Tesla was right, then people would come up with a question: why do we, pardon me, buy hydrocarbons instead of getting electricity for free, which there is plenty around? Well, therefore, this topic was closed for many years. However, this didn't calm down the inquisitive minds of other researchers who continued making attempts to rebuff that very Einstein who had said that as long as there is no experimental evidence of such a correlation doesn't exist. It exists only in imagination of those who assert that. Einstein hinted at Bohr. Even after Einstein's death, his followers continued to assert that as long as there is no experiment, it's impossible to prove this. The most interesting thing is that in due time there appeared an Irish physicist, John Bell, who, being by and large a theoretical physicist, by means of profound mathematical analysis, managed to prove a possibility of getting experimental evidence as such. Thus, by constructing a machine that would create many pairs of entangled particles, it was possible to prove this interconnection. And that was no longer philosophy but a real experiment, which could be carried out, and thus an end could be put to this philosophical dispute once and for all. This Irish physicist was little known, but his book on this subject was published. It so happened that a postgraduate student by the name of John Clauser, while trying to look into quantum mechanics, accidentally came across the works by John Bell. He decided to build such a machine and to understand, first of all, for himself whether there is an interconnection or not, and what quantum mechanics is, real science or fiction, a pseudoscience. He built such a machine and experimentally proved that Bohr had been completely right, while Einstein had been mistaken. A supernatural correlation between two entangled particles really exists. Well, despite his discovery, John Clauser, basically just like many other modern physicists who study quantum mechanics, has still failed to understand what kind of a correlation that is and why entangled particles, regardless of distances at which they are dispersed, instantaneously react to changes in one or another particle, meaning with no loss of time.
Yes, indeed. An answer to this question, which scientists have been trying to answer for almost 100 years already, would certainly be a serious breakthrough for modern physics. Nowadays in science it is as the academician Landau, who in his time was Niels Bohr's student, used to say with a touch of humor that, generally speaking, everything is clear, but tricky questions are possible, which only Bohr can answer.
And right here, we proceed to the most interesting part. As a matter of fact, everything is simple, even very simple. For example, in the spring of 2015, the primordial AllatRa physics report was released by AllatRa IPM. In the form of a theory, this report clarified the structure of the universe from the very first building blocks of the world structure, which in the report are actually called particles, up to the isosmic grid that determines space of the entire universe and consists of cells. These cells consist of the so-called aziosmic membranes, basically those of our viewers who are interested in familiarizing themselves with the report in more detail will be able to do this easily since it is freely available on the internet. They will be able to figure out on their own what particles are, what aziosmic membranes are, and everything else. Generally speaking, people will be able to figure it out after reading it on the internet. Yet going back to quantum mechanics, I will just briefly say what is related to the report. It is the fact that all these supernatural correlations between entangled particles are precisely determined by the function of the aziosmic membrane. This very membrane actually separates the visible world from the invisible one, meaning it separates and connects lower dimensions with higher ones. It separates time from timelessness and infinity from a point.
So an understanding of what the aziosmic membrane is and how it functions is basically the key that opens a door to a completely new era for science.
As of today, thank God, while talking to outstanding physicists of our times, I'm happy with the fact that they already understand that this material world is located in 6 dimensions. This is an important point. Why? Because indeed the entire material world is located in 6 dimensions. Our habitual everyday life is the 3rd dimension. But everything that we can imagine with our consciousness is contained only within 6-dimensionality. Consciousness and all the magic that takes place, it exactly takes place at the level of the 6th dimension. In the 7th dimension, this no longer exists, although the world continues to be material. And here it is interesting, we already talked about this more than once, but I think it is worth repeating again that indeed the entire material world consists of 72 dimensions. But precisely the material world, where the power of the system is prevailing, let's say, after all the system considers itself and sets itself against God, it is limited to 6 dimensions. As for the rest of the dimensions, they actually restrain and control the system's power, so that it doesn't go beyond the limits of the 6 dimensions. Let's say, like in any good laboratory, there exist not one, but many systems that ensure prevention and safe performance. Well, I'm not saying that humankind is an experiment, not at all. Humankind is a chance, it is life. Generation of life. While generation of life always occurs under certain extreme conditions, and again, everything begins with a struggle or opposition.
So it's important to understand that the system functions only up to the 6th dimension, while in the 7th dimension it doesn't rule. As for the other 66 dimensions,
the other 66 dimensions are superstructures that control those several dimensions in which the system itself exists. And this entire control is maintained through the aziosmic membrane. It's an absolute control. It is those 66 dimensions which are located above the 6. For understanding, I would also like to clarify that in the aziosmic membrane itself there is no concept of time. In the higher dimensions close to the spiritual world, just like in the spiritual world itself, There is no concept of time at all. There it is always now. Whereas in the three-dimensional world, in our habitual dimension, there is no concept of now. While I've been articulating the word now, all of us, both myself and those who are participating in this conversation with me, as well as our viewers, have covered an enormous distance in space. I mean we as material objects through the material world, through the exosmic membranes, through these cells, across the exosmic grid, we have covered a tremendous distance. And we don't have such numbers to count how many cells, every particle of our body, and simultaneously every particle of our consciousness has passed through. This is also worth thinking about. Meanwhile, in the higher dimensions, and especially in the spiritual world, beyond the exosmic grid, nothing like that exists. There it is always now. Only here we have a concept of distance. There it is relative, there it is boundless. But at the same time, you can always be where you are and where you are needed. Human consciousness will not understand this, because other laws operate there, and humanity is yet to perceive at least the initial basics of these laws.
Indeed, while exploring yourself, you come to know the true world, the real world, the spiritual world, and not the computer simulation of this hologram of the three-dimensional world created by consciousness.
Right. I'd like to say that in the report, basically nothing new for humanity is described. Everything new is the well-forgotten old. Everything that is described in the primordial AllatRa physics report was known to humanity as far back as 12,000 years ago. As confirmation of this, I can say that tablets have been preserved until today, in which complex interactions of elementary particles such as electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on are depicted. Moreover, they are depicted precisely as it is described in the report. And in confirmation that is not an empty theory, those who are interested should actually familiarize themselves with the report and not rush into listening to their consciousness, which will immediately begin to criticize, but should look into it a little bit. This is worth the time spent.
12,000 years ago is quite an impressive period of time.
The fact that many people may counter, how can it be 12,000 years ago? After all, according to modern doctrines, humanity only emerged approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago. But I would like to say that the world is much more ancient and complex than modern scientists recount to present-day humanity. Basically, whoever is interested will look into these issues on their own and will read the report. Modern science, I'm not asserting that it's in an embryonic state in terms of its development, of course not, but the fact that it is at the intrauterine development stage, that's for sure. Only after the birth of science beyond the three-dimensional world, its true full-scale development will begin. If certainly, by that time, humanity doesn't destroy itself because of excessive pridefulness and spiritual impoverishment imposed on personality by the system by means of its enslaving tool, consciousness, well, this is already the choice of people themselves.
Right. Igor Mikhailovich, this knowledge which relates to physics, is it given for understanding of the spiritual world?
I wouldn't say that the very knowledge which deals with physics, other sciences or something else, is given for understanding of the spiritual world. No. It only brings a person closer to understanding that there is something else, something different, that there is something behind this, just like that very quantum mechanics. It gives understanding that the world is not limited only to three-dimensionality, and those laws which we are accustomed to live by, I mean physical laws, these are just a manifested part that has been studied within this three-dimensionality. But who has studied it? Again, consciousness, by means of some devices located in this three-dimensionality. Yet it's impossible to study higher dimensions, at least the fifth or the sixth dimension, by means of any device. Why? Because there are no such devices. They must be located there. For better understanding of this issue, perhaps, I will explain. Let's say you are sitting on the first floor of a multi-story building, in a tightly locked-up room, and holding a mirror in your hand. Everything that you can see is a reflection of yourself or of something else, for instance, walls located in this room. But in this mirror you cannot see what is located on the floor above. I mean, this is the entire set of tools a person can operate with, while he is on the first floor inside this room.
Unfortunately, many people underestimate the role of physics.
As long as a person is in this world, he needs to eat. It's common sense. People need clothes, they need food. While that physics, which was spoken about and which was mentioned in the report released at AllatRa IPM, upon its development, it provides a possibility not to ruin nature. It enables a person to allocate more time to the spiritual world and not to worry about his daily bread. Why? Because that physics actually brings you to an understanding, knowledge, and possibility of operating with the original bricks that will create atoms, which will create molecules, and out of which it will be easy to produce everything you need, from, excuse me, shoes to the daily bread. You see, basically from a house to a car. And a person doesn't need to spend a lot of time on work or something else. However, this is unacceptable in the present-day world. Absolutely unacceptable. Why? Because a human must be kept under control and subordinated. The system stereotypically imposes all this. It always creates some people, let's say, super responsible ones, who assume the function of controlling other people for the sake of those same people. They know better, can do it better, and provide for other people's lives. In such a case, everyone must work and earn money, while money is like a system of binding a person to this material life. If you don't have money, you have no funds to pay for electricity or gas, it will be cold and dark in your premises. But again, even to acquire some kind of space to live in, you need money. To go outside, you have to get dressed. You need money. To avoid dying of hunger, you need money. Here's the answer for you. Hence what? Hence you have to go and earn. You get into certain conditions of existence. That's the way the whole society is arranged, and certain rules of the game are formed. What is work, работа in Russian? Do you know the root of this word?
Slave, rab in Russian.
Here's the answer. So a person is bound and he has to coexist with other people in society and to live according to certain rules, which exclude everything that is called spiritual. The most that you will be given is religion or science. Well, entertain or distract yourself. Here's the answer. Everything is very simple. But when a person gains, for example, an opportunity to acquire everything he needs without leaving his room, or to travel anywhere without spending anything, including time, he doesn't need funds. How to control such a person? If a person with such capabilities is under the control of consciousness, that is scary. But, again, this knowledge as such, consciousness is against this knowledge coming into the world. But, as I'm explaining, with the development of this knowledge, let's take for instance that very quantum mechanics, people will learn that there is a supernatural correlation. Since there is a supernatural correlation, it means there is also another world, the world beyond the boundary of this world. Hence there is good and bad. People begin to realize this is like that fruit of knowing good and evil. You see, in other words, if according to the biblical legend people lived and knew only good, then having taken a bite of this fruit, they learned what evil is. And now, this knowledge is like dewdrops that help seekers, again, only seekers, to learn that not only evil exists, but there is also good. That there is not just death, but there is also life. There is not only the devil, but there is also God. And that a human is not limited by this world in his existence.
As personality.
As personality, of course, first and foremost, and not as a slave of the system. If a person is far from the spiritual world, he communicates with the system. I would even say he's just a slave of the system. Only after getting to know himself as personality will a person be able to learn to control his consciousness from the position of the spiritual observer, from the position of personality, and only then will he stop being a slave of consciousness, as part of the system, in other words. Speaking the language of religion, he will stop being a slave of the devil.
He will stop serving the system and will become a free personality.
Yes, for personality, there are no barriers in knowing the truth.
This is very interesting and important information. You understand how stereotypically people's consciousness will react to all this. Because as a rule, what does consciousness do? It reacts stereotypically with a squall of criticism and emotional indignation to everything that is new to it, that is disadvantageous to consciousness itself, so that its power over a person is not ruined. Moreover, it is very aggressive towards everything spiritual. In fact, even hearing this knowledge, consciousness will attack people.
Consciousness always criticizes, especially if something is related to the true knowledge. If consciousness hears anything about what is truly spiritual, it always rears up.
Well, yes, if we look from the perspective of consciousness, what can it scream about? Its ego self. Satan forbid that consciousness loses control over personality. You cannot say God forbid because it doesn't apply to the system. After all, speaking the language of religion, it belongs to Satan, meaning to what is mortal.
Right. Why? Because it's incomprehensible for consciousness. It will never be able to understand it. And what I'm talking about now will simply cause a storm or rejection in many people's consciousness, up to the point that there is a desire to turn off the video, but at the same time, since there is a mention of what is beyond the verge of consciousness's understanding, the system will force many people to listen again and again, even if they are controlled by consciousness. Why? Because the system itself is always interested in learning something new, so as to gain some kind of power. It always strives to become like God. That's why it is incessantly self-developing. But it only thinks so, I mean the system, that at some point it will be able to develop itself in some way, that it will become equal.
But everything is limited in the system.
Certainly everything is limited in the system. Yet I'll repeat once again, even what I'm talking about now can evoke a whole storm of indignation and revolt in the consciousness of many people who are actually enslaved by the system now. This has to be understood. Even people being far from what I'm talking about might subject my words to criticism, to put it mildly. Even though this seemingly doesn't concern them, they have listened to it accidentally. But at the same time, this can give rise to a whole squall of indignation in them. But why? If they stop and think, who in them is indignant and why? If they believe that this doesn't interest them, that they are independent, they understand and know everything, then why are they so outraged at this? Why are they not outraged at other things that happen in this world? Why are they not outraged at the fact that people kill and deceive each other? Why are they not outraged at the presence of evil in this world? A simple question. But when you talk about what is good, that's it, it means you benefit from this. Yet who talks about this in people's consciousness? Do they themselves think about this, or does the system tell them about it? Again, banal stereotypical mindsets from the system. Everything boils down to what? Back to this narrow understanding of various things, and right away parallels with something are drawn.
Yes, it turns out that the system has extracted a fragment from a conversation and found something more or less similar in its memory. And it doesn't matter that it's different by content. The main thing for the system is to quickly substitute and present something as a result. And since the system is the house of lies, as the ancients used to say, it doesn't matter to it that the result is false and substituted. In a word, artificial intelligence strives to be crafty. It's good if an operator is clever, uncovers these mistakes in his computer right away and figures out himself what is what. But as a rule, people don't really notice when the system squares a circle, a banal perception of the world through the patterns of consciousness.
Tried stereotypical thinking.
Yes, the system itself enslaves. Therefore, a person in whom consciousness predominates sees precisely enslavers in all his competitors. You're just surprised when you meet some people who don't even understand what they say, who dictates inside them, how they react to that very book AllatRa, to the AllatRa movement, to that good which people implement in different countries of the world, and you understand how consciousness emits such indignation out of nothing, how scared it is of losing power over such a person.
But it is consciousness that is indignant. Again, it is indignant in whom? In those very slaves of the system. The system is deceitful, it always lies, and first of all, it deceives a person himself, personality. It simply exploits him. But the trouble is that people don't understand that they are not who they consider themselves to be. It's not them. Consciousness is a tool, but it's not a human being.
Just now, Igor Mikhailovich, you said that consciousness is a tool, and I've recalled how one fellow, discussing about the knowledge, or more precisely, his consciousness came up with another extreme. Since consciousness hinders me, since it deceives me this way, that's it, I won't develop it.
Well, and thus to equate his consciousness to that of a monkey, meaning to have poorly developed consciousness, be disoriented in the modern world, and do what others order you, to be feeble-minded, so to say. This is a dream of many managers, to have a dumb, uncomprehending and unconscious society. Consciousness is a tool first and foremost. For example, if I give you a blunt knife and ask you to peel potatoes, will it be convenient for you to peel with it? No, you need a sharp knife. Any tool has to be calibrated to the utmost, intact and well maintained. While consciousness is a tool, it has to be well developed. The broader your horizons are, the more you comprehend, the more is embedded in you for understanding this very three-dimensionality. The question is in something else. Who controls your consciousness? Clearly, the system will always control it. Consciousness is its component. But, again, secondary consciousness or new consciousness is difficult to control, but it is controllable, yet it can easily be ignored if necessary, whereas primary consciousness is easily trainable. If you evolve as personality, a developed and well-trained consciousness is only helpful, is not detrimental. This doesn't mean that it will be more cunning and more sophisticated, believe me. No matter how much you develop your consciousness, it will be unable to develop to the level to which the system itself has developed. It's just a part of this system. While the system that has experience, let's say, of billions of years, has seen all sorts of things. That's why a well-developed consciousness facilitates understanding of this world and improves communication with other people. Generally speaking, if you're not lazy, it is only helpful.
Yes, it was hard when you didn't know about this, whereas now there is such a situation when knowledge is available, but many people don't have practical experience of working on themselves yet. Therefore, there is no real transformation of themselves and society.
There is an interesting point here. Transformation of society. Everybody aspires to transform society. However, society will transform only when people start transforming themselves. That's an essential point. You shouldn't aspire to change society without having changed yourself.
Yes, this is so. However, people seem to lack understanding of the meaning of life. The system imposes some values, that very career, family, or some search for pleasures in the external, and suggests to people that they should believe that this is actually life, that this is what your destiny and your life goal is, that you came to this world for this very purpose.
As a matter of fact, in our everyday, let's say, three-dimensional life, a family, an interaction in society, or that very career, all this is actually a component of human life. Another thing is how to approach this and from which side to look at it. Human life is too short, and a person must have time for everything. To start a family and support it, which at the same time implies that he should make a career, better if it's a decent career, so as to ensure a good income. All this is necessary, it is simply necessary for survival under present-day conditions. The question is, what predominates in a person? What is the main goal of his existence and the purpose of his life? Consciousness begins to tell us that the purpose of our life is propagation. But in this case, how do we differ from any animal? After all, if we look, the main goal and task of any animal is propagation. Well, you have propagated, continued your family line, but what is the point in this for you personally? Why do people in their old age boast that they have done a lot in their life? Job plus family, grandchildren and all the rest, but there is sadness in their eyes, because everyone understands that he hasn't had time to do the main thing. Life is very short, we already spoke about this repeatedly, both in the videos and in general, that life flows by very fast, like one instant. In fact, any time interval which you would set for yourself will pass very quickly, a week, a year. It is such a fleeting substance. The meaning of human life is exactly to join the spiritual world. This may provoke some sort of indignation in many people, but again, and here's a nuance. Indignation in what? In consciousness. Why, at the word God, spirituality, or something else, does consciousness evoke inner indignation in the overwhelming majority of people, even no matter how hurtful it is, in clergymen? As long as he wears vestments and conducts some service, he's well disposed. He tells everyone about God. But when he remains one-on-one with God, so to say, here even a thought or something else, all this nearly twitches him. All this is going on inside. Inside, not in the spiritual aspect, but in consciousness, in emotions, in everything else. Because consciousness of any human is predisposed against everything spiritual by almost 99%. It's a fact and it's true. Yet we have certain, let's say, customs, some rules of the game in society as a whole, that we have religions, we should treat them with respect. There is God, we should treat Him with respect. We should respect other people's choice and other people's faith. Thank God, such things do exist. But it is again due to certain reasons, which we won't discuss today, we won't raise these issues. Because in some people, again, in their consciousness, it provokes nothing but aggression. Why does this happen? Because I'm saying once again, any person's consciousness is predisposed against everything spiritual. This is its function. We should understand, know, and accept this, basically as a natural phenomenon. In any religion, this was mentioned many times by those people who were indeed going to God. They didn't play around and didn't treat God as sort of an executor of their desires, like, Lord, give me this or give me that. If you give it to me, you're a good God, and I believe in you.
Yes, there are a lot of stereotypical passions in consciousness, by means of which consciousness actually enslaves a person in such thought states, in the states like I want, or I don't have enough, or a state of fighting for power, for domination of one's own opinion only.
The notion of power is very important. For instance, consciousness tells many people, you don't fight for power after all. What power do you have? You have such a job, you don't aspire, don't make a career. On the contrary, you avoid and move away from power. You're not interested in power. This person considers himself to be such. Or rather, his consciousness tells him that he's so good and doesn't seek power, but at the same time, dictatorship begins in the family, towards his children, towards his other half, or among friends. In fact, a fight for power is constantly going on. Power doesn't mean to rule over nations or to manage some organizations or something else. Here, by the word power, we mean suppression of one material object by another one, or an attempt to subordinate another person to oneself. And this takes place constantly and everywhere.
This is a very interesting point, that if the dictatorship of consciousness predominates in people,
They can unite again by interests. But it would be wonderful if people really started living at least by the laws of conscience and honor, so that they would unite at least on such a basis that they would stop quarreling, fighting, killing each other and doing evil to one another. This is already a victory, a great victory over the system, over its directives. Is that possible? It is quite possible. Just as we said, to build a good, happy world, in which a person can attain spiritual liberation, to create conditions for that. Is this within people's power? It is. Can this be done? It must be done. It would be wonderful if true freedom was established in the entire world, without any evil and without contradictions. And the first thing everything begins with is honesty, honesty towards oneself.
yes, because in fact, this is merely work on oneself. And you should do everything within your power to create such conditions in society.
It's impossible to force people. It is people's choice. It is people's freedom. Even if the entire world, just note, all people all over the world become, let's say, free and try to influence one person who wants to become a subpersonality, he will become a subpersonality anyway. Why? Because it's the freedom of his choice. That's where true democracy is. Because everyone chooses whatever they strive for. Any personality aspires. This is such a natural instinct of self-preservation. Personality feels that the boundless world, the spiritual world, does exist, and it feels powers and all manifestations, while consciousness blocks it. Consciousness prevents people from understanding this. But again, who prevents a person from investing the power of his attention in his spiritual development or in the material mortal things? Nobody. Only he himself chooses the freedom of choice, while the fact that the system distracts, well, it's the right of a person as personality to look or not to look at these actors of his consciousness. The final battle of a human lasts from birth until death. A person will reap the outcome of the battle, this Armageddon, after his heart stops beating. This is true. The point here exactly is that as long as your body is living and your heart is beating, you must begin to live. After your heart stops beating, you already reap the result. Afterwards, it's already impossible to correct anything. No one will help you with prayers and no one will save you. That's true.
Yes, there is also another point to realize. In general, can humanity defeat the system as an enemy on the global scale, in the sense of categories from consciousness, if, for example, all people on the planet unite?
Humanity cannot defeat the system, because the entire system goes far beyond humanity within the framework of which we understand it. Let's just begin with this. The system is not limited to a certain number of people on a certain planet. It is much broader and spreads across the entire material universe. If we speak the language of physics, right up to the sixth dimension, this is what the system is. Therefore, you can build illusions and aspire to defeat the system. But the best thing is to defeat it within yourself and stop being its slave. That's the main goal. For example, even if all people together unite, well, again, if their unification is at the level of consciousness, they will strengthen it. They will strengthen the system itself, not more. But if people open up and evolve spiritually, and their unification is based on spiritual perception of the boundless and infinite world through feelings, then the entire might of the system becomes actually less than the least of anything possible.
As they used to say in ancient times, everything boils down to the pore particle. Igor Mikhailovich, earlier you told us, in a way interesting for understanding, that in reality the system itself has no image, because the system itself is stationary pore particles, speaking the language of AllatRa physics. The system merely begets images, but the system itself is nothing.
Everything that is finite is worthless. It is nothing.
Igor Mikhailovich, in this video we already repeatedly mentioned the harmfulness of magic, but looking at the modern world, you understand that people have an insufficient understanding of what magic from the system is and what their consciousness does in everyday life. I'll briefly tell you how, for example, my consciousness used to discourse when I heard about this topic. Well, that magic definitely does not concern me. I'm neither a psychic nor a great foreteller, nor a mage who performs some rituals, nor an old witch who boils frogs in a cauldron and rides a broom. Because in my consciousness, magic means a sorcerer from a fairy tale, a fire-eater from a circus, or a shaman from a movie. There are some images, some magic activities which I either saw in movies or read about in fairy tales in my childhood, when something appears out of nothing. But all this magic had nothing to do with my life. Generally speaking, there was such an understanding that magic is all about fairy tales, while this is real life. Many people erroneously suppose so. Igor Mikhailovich, please tell us, what is magic from consciousness in a person's everyday life?
Regarding magic, People use magic in everyday life very often, and they do not notice that. When a person curses someone, when he hates him and wishes evil, this is already a part of magic. This should be known and understood. When a person comes to some temple for communication with God, but asks for the health of his body or for that of his relatives and close people, this is also magic. When a person asks for wealth or resolution of some problem in the material world, this is magic too. Everything that relates to fulfillment in three-dimensionality of some human desires, again relating to everything material. Well, health is also a part of matter, is a part of a material body. All this is magic. This should be understood. Unfortunately, this originated as far back as from ancient priests. They imposed all this on people because they realized that people worshipped higher forces. They intimidated people. Again, whom did they scare people with? They scared them with God. But is this really normal? God is love, you cannot say otherwise. It's impossible to select words in any language of the modern world to describe what God is. Only love. That's the true understanding. But this true understanding, out of all human words, may be designated only as the highest and the purest love, meaning true love. There can be no other love, in fact. We already discussed this more than once. Therefore, it turns out that people, whether they want this or not, do encounter magic. For example, when a person is planning some meeting for tomorrow, well, it's clear, you're planning. The essence of the possible conversation is clear. Study the issue, get ready, train your consciousness, prepare it for possible questions. That's one thing. But when a person starts replaying in his head, yet the question is whether it's in his head, in consciousness, these actors on the stage begin to play roles for him. And a person already sees himself talking to another person tomorrow. He's planning and he's already trying to influence his opponent in order to achieve a desirable result for himself. Isn't this magic? It is magic. A person wastes those vital forces that should be directed to perception through feelings, to the contact with the spiritual world. A person wastes them on material benefits, on fulfillment of his own desires. Later on they say, he is such a good person, but why is everything so bad? Or to put it simply, after the death of his physical body, a person repents, consciousness trembles, while personality is perplexed. After all, he was good, he did nothing bad to anyone. It's just that he lived his entire life in magic, put attention into wrong things, and hasn't arrived anywhere. He was going in circles all the time, although he could have not only belonged to any religion, but he could have also been seeking high spiritual goals, trying to achieve them again by means of what? By means of his consciousness. Consciousness is a tool, a necessary tool. But it's a tool, let's say, with its own temperament. So if you need to solve something, let it solve. This is what you finance, this is what you pay attention to. However, when it starts imposing some magic qualities on you, draws you into its various games, this is what you shouldn't do. Many people do not understand this and do not notice how they become a part of a game, participants of theatrical shows. And again, due to what? Magic performances. Well, again, consciousness says that magic means to perform some ceremonies. One should beat a tambourine, throw herbs or frogs, preferably living ones, into a boiling cauldron. That's when a magic action takes place, and a person acquires or receives something. That's ritualism. Rituals merely help to focus. It doesn't matter whether you throw into a cauldron, whether you have a cauldron or not. It's essential that you desire this. The very process of desiring is already nothing else but a magic action, especially when people already imagine the end result. Let's say, of that very meeting tomorrow, you can practice shamanism, beat a tambourine, throw herbs into a cauldron or something else, or you can just imagine the end result, how you will meet with a person tomorrow, what he will tell you, what you will tell him, and how you will argue during the conversation, and then you will persuade him so easily. These are games of consciousness. People do not understand that at this moment, your consciousness is in contact with his consciousness, although a person doesn't notice that, and the consciousnesses of both of you are already making a certain decision. As a rule, they make that decision. which is essential for the system. Let's just put it gently. But the result is always predetermined. Yet, when you don't do this, the system does not guarantee a result, either to your consciousness or to the consciousness of your opponent. You prepare materials that you need, you learn, come to a meeting, and then it will be as it will be. You didn't play out a scenario. You didn't engage in magic. You're free in this case. And here you have many more chances to win the argument. And this is not magic, it's the truth. Why? Because the system is not prepared for your action.
Yes, I remember you telling us about this, and it helped very much in realizing that magic is a thirst to influence someone.
Yes.
Magic is dreams and desires. It's a thirst to influence someone in the future or a desire to change something in the past, to rewrite one's past. If he would have said that, I would have answered him that way. Well, if you need to do something, just go and do it. If you want to say something, just say it. If not, then forget it. But in no case play games with consciousness. It's games of alternative existence. After all, you give real power, and in return, the system only nurtures your pridefulness.
Yes, why enter into this mental, abstract dialogue with someone? Replay these conversations in your thoughts for 2 or 3 days before even meeting this person. Why visualize that you possess something? This is actually magic. People think a lot about empty things, fantasize, have dialogues with other people in their thoughts, argue, assert. Moreover, they argue about what happened a long time ago, think about events of the past or even about events of the future. But this is precisely magic from consciousness, when you pay attention to three-dimensionality, to what is ultimately like a drop wearing away a stone. And this magic is different from creative planning. For example, when you just need to cook some food, you plan what to cook. It is ordinary planning, ordinary prioritization like a working day routine. But when you imagine how you will be admired, how you will be praised for the food you have cooked, this is already a desire to satisfy your pridefulness. It's already magic from consciousness, visualization. In other words, if you need to cook food, just cook it. Act in this direction, but do not imagine.
Yes, magic is when you can't get an emotion or something desired. Then consciousness begins to play over an alternative reality in your thoughts. But have you ordered this movie? After all, what is going on? You evoke images and endow them with the power of attention. That is with action. The only trouble is that they are an illusion. And you waste real life on the system. As a result, the system prolongs its life, while you acquire death for yourself.
Yes, unfortunately. And if your consciousness has nothing to do, it's better to have it study something.
Yes, but in general, it's better to spend time on spiritual development, just to strengthen contact with the spiritual world in yourself, because this is boundless happiness. This is inner, infinite, God's love. It is much better to be happy than miserable. It is better to be alive than dead.
Absolutely right. So the point is not about planning as such, but that you do not cherish any illusions about that. You plan, get prepared, and then it will be as it will be. You just move towards the goal. For you to go and buy some bread or to go to business negotiations is the same thing, so to say, it is decided on the spot, while your entire importance and seriousness is already in something different. It is in those events that occur in perception of the spiritual world through feelings. And you already spend the power of attention on three-dimensionality, not in such huge quantities and, generally, as required in the saving mode.
Yes, when people prepare for something, they often say, God willing. But this is actually wrong.
This is wrong. God really doesn't engage in that. It is just convenient for people, or rather, it is convenient for their consciousness to shift everything onto the higher and strong one. They say God gave, God sent, God something else. But which God do they mean? God who is in eternity, or God who is in the temporarily existing system? The temporary God or the true God? Here one should also understand. People often throw words around without understanding their essence. And this is also a kind of magic. A word has power. Some religious scriptures start with, "In the beginning there was the Word." There is a reason for that. And it applies not only to Christianity, but it was also in the pre-Christian religions. That in the beginning there was a Word. A word is the beginning of so many processes. Why? Because it is voicing of your inner desire, saying it out loud. This in itself is already an activation of certain processes. A person has reactions to habitual words. A negative word said to you causes a certain reaction in you, or a kind word causes another reaction, and so on. For example, what is entire psychology built on? On the word. What is religion built on? On the word. So, word is word. No matter how you twist it, a word is a tool of three-dimensionality. It's a tool of this world. A thought is also a tool of the material world. While perception through feelings or direct contact is completely different, it is distinguishable from both a word and a thought. That's why consciousness does not perceive it. And that is why many people who live by consciousness and are completely controlled by consciousness do not grasp the simple truth. They understand all sorts of things, magic, rituals, they comprehend it all, it is all clear, it can be logically explained, but they cannot explain the fact itself, the reality and existence of God. They try to believe, they pretend to believe, many even pretend to serve God, and they teach this to others, but let's look at them without masks, and everything falls into place.
Yes. Indeed, it's a good question, how to distinguish people who live by the spiritual world from laymen. After all, people very often look for some signs, but in three-dimensionality.
But one can feel these people, really feel them. It's just that people do not understand that what is dead belongs to the dead, while what is alive belongs to the alive. When people learn to feel the truth, such questions simply will not arise.
Sure. Actually, I would like to advise people, even if at the level of consciousness, simple out of curiosity, isn't it interesting whether the spiritual world exists or not? Is it possible to somehow exist without thoughts? I mean, without the usual way of thinking, but at the level of perception through feelings. Is it possible to control one's own consciousness? Isn't that interesting? Just to try.
Yes, as you, Igor Mikhailovich, said at the beginning of our meeting, simply at least as an experiment to try to observe oneself, how thoughts come, to write them down, try to control them, try to stop this flow of thoughts or even try to manage it. Then it is very easy to come to an understanding that all of this is not yours, and it is not you. You should just try to live by a different perception through the deepest feelings. And only one pattern from consciousness stands in this way. It's the pattern of doubts, up to the point that consciousness tells people that I will not succeed, I'm not very smart, or I'm too young, or on the contrary, I'm already too old.
The soul has no age, and neither does personality. And there is no difference what a person's age is. Both an old man and a child and anyone else can come to know the spiritual world, if there is such a desire. But the desire arises exactly from personality, from the aspiration, not from the mind. If one aspires from the mind, it won't work. Consciousness never seeks God. That's also a paradox, but it always seeks magic and secret knowledge. It seeks those powers which are hidden beyond the three-dimensional world, in order to get to that which helps manipulate other matter.
For a human being as personality, This means going around in a circle. This is simply wasting one's life for nothing. A great many people get stuck in these very doubts.
In their thoughts and so on, they go on fighting with themselves, with thoughts. Some people are standing and waiting for someone to bring it to them on a silver platter. At the same time, they want this, really sincerely want this, but do nothing. They don't work on themselves because of laziness or something distracts them and so forth. While many really talented people who are actually aspiring, who are moving, confidently moving, but they turn to the path of magic or extrasensory perception, you cannot call it otherwise. When people encounter this in reality, it impresses them. Whom does it impress? It impresses consciousness. And if we simply take a look, where are they? They have remained in the same place. Is there any point in that?
So it turns out that initially a person is driven exactly by what is good, exactly by the aspiration from personality.
Of course, by what is good, but the system always alters the good into what is beneficial for it. This is true.
Yes, even if we take a simple example, in fact, often people, after receiving some initial experience in meditations, try to help, but again, in their understanding, to help their neighbor, for example, to send rays of love towards him or something else. And later, they know that, yes, suddenly the neighbor indeed began to feel somewhat better.
Well, this is banal physics, it really happens this way. He gives a part of his life to another person, he redirects it, and the other person takes it and successfully tosses it over where? To consciousness. So the first one gives it to consciousness and the second one gives it to consciousness. There is no benefit to either the first one or the second one. This is unacceptable, this is magic.
Yes, and it is clear that it eventually ends with...
They will learn. Let's say there is such a term as subpersonality, we mentioned it. Or as they say in Christianity, hell. It will not end with anything good. If you want to help, just help. If a person is sick, take him to the doctor. If a person is sad, support him, talk and explain things to him. We need to be supportive.
Now, we would like to briefly touch upon the subject of altered states of consciousness. As of today in the world, a lot of both clinical and experimental material has been accumulated regarding altered states of consciousness. And it's already clear that a human experiences and abides in various states of consciousness every day. For instance, such altered states of consciousness that are advantageous to consciousness. These are the state of wakefulness, the state of sleep, reactions of anger, the state of panic, the state of dreaminess. Those very hysterical states, the states caused by consumption of alcohol or drugs, and hypnotic states. Meaning, these are the states of consciousness which people encounter most often in three-dimensionality. But there are also altered states of consciousness which accompany spiritual unfolding. Those are meditations, prayerful states, and spiritual practices. Generally speaking, there are altered states of consciousness that are beneficial to a person when it comes to development of his personality, and there are states advantageous to consciousness, ones that actually can even cause harm to a person. So what happens in the states advantageous to consciousness? There is an active influence on personality, and consciousness deprives it of a chance of self-identification. For example, if a person is in a state of rage, he is not able to identify himself as personality. He is simply under the control of consciousness.
Yes, and distinctions are obvious. Those altered states of consciousness which are advantageous to consciousness are felt as discrete ones. They are separated from each other, and for every such state, it is possible to identify adjacent states. What is meant here? What they begin with, their characteristics, and what they eventually transform into. That's how the system plans. Everything is stereotypical in it, according to a scheme that leads to predetermined results. While in spiritual practice, everything is different. Transition from a deep altered state of consciousness to perception through feelings occurs smoothly, in a straight line. as if fading away, dissipating, until there happens this very complete disconnection of personality from consciousness, and its transition and immersion into perception through feelings. And there is no longer any influence of consciousness there. Perception through feelings radically differs from a deep, altered state of consciousness. When there is perception through the deepest feelings, a continuous, single-vector process of living here and now is taking place. There, so to say, consecutive states occur, and they are unpredictable. They are alive. They are stable and constantly new at the same time. These are like different states of multifaceted, infinite God's love, which cause both delight and bliss, not at the level of consciousness, but at the level of the deepest feelings. But this is just one of the characteristics of perception of the spiritual world through the deepest feelings.
You know, I will share how my consciousness previously reacted stereotypically to the phrase altered states of consciousness. Even the term itself already provoked a sort of caution. It provoked fear due to lack of knowledge, because for consciousness this meant either some pathology or leaving the comfort zone. It was just scary for consciousness to change. But when I read the book AllatRa and encountered the knowledge, this fear vanished. And on the contrary, there appeared even an aspiration to change myself, just to go seriously in the spiritual direction. Now, when I see the exposure of the system, I just globally see and understand exactly what is happening in a person and in that very society, and why science is pussyfooting around this issue, just because it was precisely consciousness and not a free personality that placed its accents in science. And exactly from the perspective of the primordial knowledge, I already study scientific works with a completely different understanding. And, you know, it's amazing because it is obvious how from one work to another, consciousness defends its directives, exaggerates their significance, and correspondingly it depreciates the significance of those states which lead to spiritual enlightenment, because consciousness doesn't actually understand them. For example, it focuses attention on the fact that the state of wakefulness and the states accompanying it are supposedly normal states of consciousness. And so here, of course, the system is fully armed, while other states of consciousness, exactly those states of consciousness that lead to spiritual enlightenment, this is what consciousness regards as something individual, something doubtful, and in general it equates them to its psychiatric material outlook as manifestation of psychosis, psychic self-regulation, or increase of self-esteem and self-confidence. Consciousness studies that very religious ecstasy and mystical experience first and foremost as an opportunity to exert influence on somebody or to control the crowd. But if we actually look broader, for example, from the perspective of various cultures and traditions of peoples of the world, then it turns out that for millennia a totally different situation was preserved. Many peoples of antiquity, including those very Eastern civilizations, as well as many other peoples, as consciousness of some scientists considers primitive peoples, they believed and keep believing that almost every adult should know how to enter into a spiritual trance. Everyone certainly calls it differently, but the point is to find a way into this very spiritual fusion, to be able to enter into a spiritual connection, into contact with God. And a great importance, a great value was attached to this as the goal of existence of a human being, to know what is genuine, to know how to become enlightened, to know how to gain life. As for the one who was unable to do that, he was considered in society, speaking modern language, to be a psychological cripple. He was considered flawed. At that, everyone had their own, tried and tested both simple and complex techniques for stimulation, for entry into altered states of consciousness, and there was self-exploration through those very meditations, through prayerful states, and through mastering spiritual practices. Generally speaking, they had their own path to the general spiritual road, which leads to the ultimate goal, to become alive during temporary existence. It is certainly clear that consciousness has also done some work and introduced its distortions and substitutions. Well, at least it is clear what people strove for in their communities and what their common goal was. Yet, what do we see nowadays? We see how the system promotes its mindsets in civilization, and it does everything so that you as personality would become dead. After all, today, normal states of consciousness are considered to be exactly those discrete states which keep a person in the bonds of consciousness's patterns, which satisfy a person's biological, psychological, and social functions. For instance, what goal is set while studying altered states of consciousness? It is to cure diseases of the body, to free oneself from conflict or inattention, to study the deep inner content of one's psyche, or to function adequately and constructively in society. But the trouble is that adequately and constructively implies from the standpoint of consciousness as a part of the system. And so, what have scientists been studying for many years? Hypnosis, that which actually suppresses personality. The issues of sleep and dreams are studied, meaning where consciousness can also make its contribution, and opportunities to anesthetize one's body through these altered states of consciousness are explored. And it seems like everything is designated for humane purposes. But if we get to the root, consciousness is interested only in those sides which enslave personality, which just turn it into a slave for consciousness. Even those altered states of consciousness which a person uses at the stages of his or her spiritual path, even there, consciousness makes its substitutions. Look what it uses in those very scientific works to loop a person's understanding. It says that if you follow the spiritual path, the path of a meditative, spiritual trance, you will find nothing there except hallucinations, except aneroid states of consciousness characterized by a combination of images of the three-dimensional world and fantastical ideas, or let's say a commonplace religious ecstasy, mystical experience, accompanying fantasies, meaning false states which substitute for the reality. Well, of course, this is also partly true, and the substitution is hidden at the root as always, because consciousness itself is the one that substitutes illusion for the truth by exactly influencing either aggressively or gently through its states.
This is strongly felt.
For instance, in perception through feelings, there are no images. There are processes which are beyond the functions of consciousness. That is why consciousness itself limits even the understanding of this issue as such. The highest perception for it is an expanded state of consciousness, a state of peace and comfort. It is false perception through hallucinations of consciousness, meaning its substitution of perception through feelings, when in a religious trance people perceive, for example, representatives of the spiritual world in three-dimensional images and even talk to them. But after all, this is an illusion from consciousness, with which it substitutes personality's genuine perception of the spiritual world through feelings. This happens because it is consciousness itself that creates these three-dimensional images and substitutes communication with itself for the reality of the spiritual world.
They broadcast from consciousness. That's absolutely true. We already discussed this in other videos that people who start playing with magic, visions come to them, various saints, supposedly representatives of the spiritual world. But again, they come in images. What does it mean in images? Just as we see the same people as us with our earthly eyes, or ourselves in a mirror reflection, in the same way they see these representatives. Thus, to put it simply, it's an illusion, another deceit, a delusion.
Yes, while spiritual practice is liberation from this very false perception of consciousness. It is personality's exit beyond the limits of consciousness's functioning. But people often stop at the stage of comfort and the stage of mysticism, meaning at the stage of transition from an altered state of consciousness to perception through feelings.
There is an interesting point here. At the stage of cognition, of this perception through feelings, it really reveals to people that which consciousness dreams of. But the very first indications begin to reveal themselves exactly when a person reaches deep states of an altered state of consciousness. In other words, there begins what is now called extrasensory perception, or metaphysics, magic, and so on. And why is it said that you shouldn't cling onto this under any circumstances? Because you will remain exactly at that level.
Yes, in fact, all this magic from consciousness is akin to hypnosis, this very interference from outside. As they say, there is such a term in psychology as highway hypnosis, or driving without attention mode. When a person is at the wheel for a long time, he is driving a car on a highway, and he experiences a reduction of sensitivity of his sense organs and a deficit of movements. Tentatively speaking, we can say that on the spiritual path, something similar happens when a person loses vigil, when his attention weakens, when he gets bewitched by this illusion of the system and reduction of perception through feelings, and this very deficit of advancement of personal work on himself takes place. Therefore, it is very important to know these tricks of consciousness for oneself. These tricks when being in altered states of consciousness, both subtle ones which are beneficial to consciousness, upon which substitution of the truth occurs, and coarse ones which cause specific harm, like that very alcoholism or drug addiction, where a fight between two consciousnesses takes place.
Again, we should know that alcoholism, consumption of drugs, and everything else, after all, whom does it come from? It comes from consciousness. Moreover, this very imposition of alcoholism and drug addiction originates from primary consciousness, no matter how paradoxical it is. It is trying to erase the influence of secondary consciousness. It is trying to escape from the power of secondary consciousness. It's a fight with the system inside the system. And here, primary consciousness experiences, when under the effect of alcohol or drugs, the activity of secondary consciousness abates, primary consciousness starts feeling itself a hero. Again, megalomania, self-exaltation, and all opportunities. This is merely the consciousness of a primate. It feels like it is at the top of this world. And this very state, exactly this state, forces a person to consume alcohol or drugs again and again. It is freedom from consciousness, freedom of consciousness from consciousness, a paradox. Well, it is natural that a person becomes even more dependent on the system. Let's say a person who at least feels the spiritual world, who has at least a little contact with it and at least knows a little. I emphasize, not believes, but has an experience, knows about the existence of the spiritual world. He will never consume either alcohol or drugs, because this strengthens and activates primary consciousness, which begins to suppress and affect personality more actively. Well, why would you create obstacles for yourself? It's the same as when you want to run 100 meters, but before that you throw about various unnecessary items from a construction site, and then you run, stumble, fall. It is painful and unpleasant for you. If you want to go for a run in the morning, run on even ground. Why would you litter on your own running track?
Igor Mikhailovich, we would also like to expand on the subject of hypnosis a little bit in the context of the knowledge regarding primary and secondary consciousness, from the standpoint of understanding hidden substitutions.
The essence of hypnosis precisely consists in direct influence on primary consciousness from the outside. After all, primary consciousness doesn't perceive the world as such, it perceives it through secondary consciousness. Let's say secondary consciousness can deceive it, yet primary consciousness perceives reactions of the body. While secondary consciousness perceives reactions of the body through primary consciousness, it is such a sequence, just to make it clear. At that, work of the brain is a reflection, let's say. It's already a material manifestation of the work of consciousness, first and foremost of the work of the primary consciousness, but it is still connected with the material world as well. However, personality is connected only with primary consciousness. As a matter of fact, all this is simple. If you take a pen and draw it all, everything falls into place.
So for personality, it's an even greater oppression when the consciousness of that very hypnotist also interferes. It turns out that not only does personality experience this very influence of its primary and secondary consciousness, but on top of that, a third party from the system also interferes. It is the hypnotist's consciousness which creates additional images, exerts influence and programmed impact.
Absolutely right. But there is a little nuance here. When upon influence, by means of hypnosis or magic, it doesn't matter which of them, there is a direct impact on primary consciousness, here a substitution also takes place. It may be suggested to a person that he is a famous singer, he will sing and perceive himself as this famous singer, answer questions and so on. We see that there was, let's say, John Smith, and he still remains John Smith. He poses as some kind of famous singer, but outwardly he hasn't changed, although he's convinced that he is really a famous singer. Why? Because, I'm saying once again, primary consciousness doesn't have a pronounced intellect, but it can use a database, meaning that experience which is accumulated or acquired by means of secondary consciousness. This is also an interesting point. Or that which we call the back essence. It's nothing other than a data bank. It's where memory is stored. And unfortunately or fortunately, the brain has nothing to do with that. What is magic? Magic is exactly performed. Well, I'll disclose a secret. When a person develops at the level of primary consciousness, when this very primary self evolves, and the system is studied, a person can indeed learn various magic techniques, that which we call extrasensory perception and all the rest. This takes place precisely due to the activeness of primary consciousness. It is able to work very actively even at the level of the sixth dimension, meaning to transform various manifestations, to see plans of the system, to hear them, and so on. As for secondary consciousness, it is surely limited. It can be surprised, generate enormous emotions and surges, emit a wave which overwhelms primary consciousness, and this is reflected on our body.
Yes, I suppose this will indeed be helpful for many people. After all, the phenomenon of hypnosis is still considered to be an unsolved mystery for researchers. But now, the very essence of this phenomenon and the harmfulness of its impact on a human being, as personality in general, is already understandable. In fact, today a lot of people know that hypnosis is used for medical purposes. Well, perhaps in some extremely severe therapeutic cases, this may even be justified. But on a whole, given the list of where specifically hypnosuggestive psychotherapy is used, and who exactly does this? Well, here already a question arises, of course, what is more important for a person, his body or personality? After all, basically, people often go to various hypnotists when they are simply too lazy to change themselves, to just take care of the health of their body and work on its bad habits. But they want magic. Yet none of them certainly thinks about what they will pay for it afterwards. Thus, it is no coincidence that even in olden times, hypnosis was written about as a phenomenon that ruins human spirit, that it is conscious service to evil. And earlier, by the way, in the past centuries, it was called animal magnetism. In that very Christianity, it was labeled as a type of witchcraft and equated with black magic. Now, after such detailed explanations, I believe it will be clearer for people why magic must not be used.
It is obvious that one mustn't use magic techniques, mustn't strive for and desire magic. Because in a human being, only consciousness can desire magic. If you dream of power, if you dream of magic, especially secret power, if you aspire to develop some super abilities in yourself, if you engage in that, you live by consciousness, meaning you mistakenly waste your time. Yes, people develop these abilities in themselves, but what's in the end? Death. It's the state of subpersonality. Age-long torments, but what is the point of these actions, of these abilities? What is the point? After all, again, certain techniques actually exist. Well, let's not talk about artificial techniques. For instance, quite often people encounter the phenomenon of rebirth of the soul, when a child suddenly starts saying that he lived at a certain time in a certain place and so on, and upon checking what the child is talking about, it turns out that it is really so. He recognizes his relatives and describes the cause of his death. This is precisely an active subpersonality which suppresses personality and starts living life instead of it. Thus, definitely, even a new personality is doomed to reincarnation, to the state of subpersonality. This happens often, unfortunately. But it is caused by certain situations, by premature death, or again by magic. A person practiced magic, he was a powerful mage. Yes, upon rebirth he can suppress the primary consciousness of a new personality and eventually be temporarily a master at the level of, I emphasize, his primary consciousness, suppressing the new primary consciousness and suppressing the activity of the new personality. And what's the point? Both personality and that very consciousness will go to reincarnation together with him, and again, it will all become a subpersonality. Yet these abilities actually don't last for a long time. He will live an unfulfilled life, because at the level of primary consciousness, it's impossible to live a fulfilled life.
It's like an illusion.
Everything is an illusion. Generally speaking, life may be compared to a supermarket, where there is always a cash register at the exit. What will you pay with? And life is very short, because time is an illusion which is imposed on us by consciousness. After all, it tells you that you still have a lot of time, that it is very long, but look behind you. Where was yesterday? And it will never come back anymore. Time flies very fast and irreversibly. If you don't strive for life now, you won't strive for it tomorrow either. That's the point. As for the day after tomorrow, you simply don't have it. That's the trouble. Well, everyone chooses what he likes and desires and what he aspires to. And the highest freedom of a human being is precisely in this. It is the right he is endowed with, the right of choice. I believe it is the fairest thing possible. Even the right to make mistakes, the right to death and the right to life. This is granted to a human.
Yes, it's just some kind of human foolishness. It turns out that pridefulness and lack of knowledge result in people doing bad things, and the system actively uses that for its purposes. For instance, even if we take those very magic phenomena, it is clear that since magic phenomena actually exist, this is needed for something on a global scale, in the format of survival of civilization as a whole. For example, we already mentioned those true saints.
You mean there are also those, let's say, who serve the spiritual world. These are the ones who are called true saints, who could somewhat influence certain events, serving, first of all, the spiritual world. There are such people, of course, certainly there are. However, the point is that such people serve the spiritual world solely in the interests of God, but not in the interests of any individuals, and all the more not in their own interests.
That is, not in the earthly, selfish interests.
Right, not in the earthly interests of their own consciousness. Their thoughts, desires and deeds cannot be selfish, because they, again, result from the actions of angels in this world, who are enclosed in bodies. They're only temporarily here.
Yes, and in fact, this differs greatly from those who at all times were called false prophets, who under the guise of spirituality actually served consciousness pursuant to their selfish motives.
And just note, we are again touching upon these false prophets, false teachers, so to say. The first thing they promise to people is excellent physical health, that you won't be sick, you will gain strength. And there is also such a term as spiritually strong. You see, strong people, spiritually strong. There is an emphasis on strength everywhere.
Yes, a desire to possess something.
To possess certain power, and an aspiration for domination.
Yes, the system promises a lot, gives something insignificant, but takes away what is greater. That is, it gives a person an illusion that...
An illusion of power. But when a person gains true power, spiritual power, and when indeed, today, a former ordinary person of yesterday is capable of much, that which no mage will ever get, does he have even a little desire to use this power for himself or for anything earthly? No.
For the spiritual, this is life, while for the earthly, this is poison.
Of course. And who would want to taste poison while being alive? That's the point. Well, the system substitutes all this. Once again, it mirrors it, promising magic, some super abilities, while in actual fact, it creates illusions. And a person wastes time on attaining another illusion. But what will he get in return? An illusion.
Right, and just to think, what do people waste their lives on?
They waste time on reading someone else's thoughts.
But what for? What will you actually do with that?
Sort out your own thoughts. You actually hear someone else's thoughts all the time, from morning to evening. Consciousness is telling you, they're not yours. If you doubt it, okay, just check, stop a thought, or change it in the direction you need. And again, the direction needed to whom? To you as a personality, or to your consciousness, the one who manipulates you.
Right, you don't want to hear thoughts even from your own consciousness. After all, the enemy lives inside every person, and it is his consciousness. The one who sees an enemy in what is external doesn't see him inside oneself. And if you choose, if you accept his directives,
if you invest the power of your attention in implementing those thoughts, desires, and aspirations which consciousness imposes on you, that's already your choice.
Right. That is why it's advantageous to the system that a person doesn't know about the true essence of consciousness, about its connection with the system, because then a person
escapes from under its power. After all, who among people likes to be controlled and goaded? No one. Note, people are very fond of teaching. Mostly those people like to teach who don't know what they teach, who don't have personal experience. And then they refer to anything whatsoever. Try to prove to others that it's their own experience and so on, although they don't understand it themselves. They themselves don't even know what they talk about. But at the same time, they demand it from others.
Yes, such people in whom consciousness still predominates are immediately visible. One of the indications of the system's work in their heads is the pattern of concealing the source, that is, where they took this knowledge from, and also their own interpretations when they convey the knowledge, distortion of it.
Once again, people always strive to present it, let's say, as their own in order to make an impression on those who listen to them and the like. Well, in this case, it is banal egoism, thirst for manipulation, thirst for power, everything from the system. These are people who act from the mind.
Yes, and they justify it by the fact that people are supposedly not ready to hear about the source. After all, the system locks the knowledge, covering it with such a point that I'll tell you about it a little bit later, maybe.
As we already discussed, consciousness always opposes everything spiritual, and in this case, a person who seemingly conveys the knowledge and speaks about it, but he speaks through consciousness, naturally he gets caught. It means that a person doesn't have a true spiritual experience. He wishes to have this experience, but even more, he wishes others to believe that he has this experience. Yet this happens until a person opens up inside. For the most part, people choose false prophets. Why? Their directives are simpler and more pleasant for consciousness, thus consciousness doesn't actually reject them.
You don't need to change anything in yourself, they say.
Absolutely right. And once again, they talk about acquisition, that you will acquire something, while all this always borders on magic. What do they promise to people? That you will get this, you will get that, and so on.
Yes, they say, follow me and listen to what I say. and you will be given. You will acquire in three-dimensionality or in the body, but they basically voice the mindsets of consciousness.
Yet, any of the true prophets who came, prophets and other knowledge carriers, they always speak on behalf of the one who sent them and who empowered them.
Yes, and their life, the life of the true prophets, is actually an example in itself.
Absolutely right, but their life is not comprehensible to consciousness. That is why people who live by and believe more in consciousness, well, belief is once again what? Whom does belief belong to consciousness? Only personal experience, spiritual experience.
Inner knowledge.
Knowledge, of course, it gives true freedom. And life begins right away and instantly. If you feel this, if you strive for it, you simply sweep everything unnecessary aside. This is like one sculptor used to say when he was asked, "How did you manage to make such a beautiful statue of this stone?" He responded, "It was always there. I just removed what was superfluous." It's the same here. A person just removes what is superfluous in himself and leaves the angel. This is simple. Whereas when active conductors of the system get involved in matters, meaning people who do not strive for spiritual development but aspire to exploit knowledge about the path for their own benefit, well, basically, there have always been such individuals. That is why various trends in religions and everywhere were created and the like. Such people always aspire to seize power. They always have inner hatred and a whole lot of desires.
Right, and such a person who lives by consciousness simply copies an image, likens himself, but he doesn't live by the knowledge inside him.
What does he liken himself to? He likens himself to what he sees in three-dimensionality, because he doesn't feel and doesn't understand what lies beyond three-dimensionality. But at the same time, he actively talks about it and exploits others, egoism, frightfulness, comfort, desire to attain something, to learn and then to exploit this knowledge for his own benefit, first and foremost. But what is actually happening? The system imposes this and they, like slaves, obediently do what their consciousness orders them to do. And so, when such a leader appears, he always builds some empires of his own to please himself, goes against everything and so on.
The most interesting thing is that when listening to these leaders, people do understand that something is wrong, but keep silent, because they see that others are also silent. And why does this happen? Because this is convenient and pleasing for the system.
Because such representatives of the system always do everything in their power to divert as many people as possible from the spiritual path. Even though they talk about the spiritual path and say, you will possess powers, you will do this and that, you will serve, but in actual fact you know this pretty well and you understand that if a person chases after extrasensory abilities, and this is nothing other than magic, then he has one route, to become a subpersonality, because whether he wants to or not, he will use these powers either for himself or for his leader, meaning in the interest of whom? A mortal human, or a part of the system. Yet when a person serves Satan, there is nothing for him to do in heaven. As they say, whoever you work for is who you will remain with.
What about people who embark on the path of true service?
As for people who embark on the path of service, true service, after all, they never use these powers for themselves. Why would they need anything for themselves? If they need bread, they will go and earn this bread for themselves. If they need clothes, they will earn these clothes. In three-dimensionality, our body is that same machine, which should work and maintain itself. They simply serve their time here, let's say, with a benefit for the spiritual world, but they always do everything only for the spiritual world, and not for themselves personally. While for themselves personally, in three-dimensionality, like ordinary people, they work and earn. They don't strive for anything unnecessary, for any excesses. You know this yourselves, don't you? Just a little while ago you wanted a lot, and then it simply loses its meaning. It really loses its meaning.
Well, yes, the way of life changes, and what used to be valued changes. For instance, you were looking for meaning in some external circumstances, but now you understand to what extent your life back then was just an empty existence in the labyrinth of the system.
Of course.
Yet, when practice began, when responsible inner work on myself started, When I came into contact with the spiritual world, which opened that which is real, this very perception through the deepest feelings, life in the fullness of spiritual love, and when indeed,
When life has become life, everything dead and temporary turns uninteresting and meaningless. But in order to understand this, people first of all need an aspiration for this. True aspiration.
yes, true aspiration and true choice. After all, the main thing has become clear that God is exactly the true reality, and the world of His love is boundless.
Right. There is one simple example. For people who are involved in service, let's say, under the signboard of something divine, but who actually serve the devil, they serve their desires, their consciousness. They serve many people whom they consider to be authorities, meaning for them, authorities exist. Whereas spiritually free people who gain life, there is only one authority for them, the spiritual world, God. While everything else is,
It simply doesn't exist.
or it is temporary. Well, everything that is temporary is temporary. Everything passes. Except for the spiritual world. God is eternal. The spiritual world is always true. It cannot be any other way. Everything that originates from the spiritual world is always true. This is definite. But this truth is in three-dimensionality, while three-dimensionality is the world of delusions. It is always distorted because of reflections and a mirror effect.
Yes, because of illusions, this very crookedness of consciousness with adjustment for the system. A vivid example, as we already mentioned, is that any person who serves his consciousness takes knowledge about the true path and talks about it, but only puts commas in his own order, at the consciousness's discretion. Hence, those who listen to him get ignited because they feel that knowledge is there, but it's just that afterwards they go in the wrong direction without even suspecting it. And generally speaking, when you study the system, you are simply amazed at how the system twists things, how it substitutes, how it imposes on a person to aggressively defend some stereotypical snags from consciousness. One might say such a mystical, atheistic worldview of the system itself.
This is an indicative point of how the system works. The devil always demands of his adept to punish a dissenter, to insult him, to call him names, to kill him, to remove him. And it always urges people to punish someone for injustice. Whereas a spiritually free person, when he sees that another person is mistaken, he may regret inside.
Feel sorry.
Feel sorry, yes, regret that he has chosen the wrong way, and that's all. Why punish someone who has punished himself much worse than you can punish him? After all, what can be more terrible than the state of subpersonality? What can be more torturous? In this world, no matter how a person is tortured, it will be over anyway. A year, 2 or 5 years, it doesn't matter how long you torture him, it will all pass, everything ends. While centuries of torments, this is more serious. That is why you certainly feel sorry for lost opportunities, for missed chances. But this is the choice. At least this is fair. A person himself chooses whom to listen to, what to do and how to act. After all, inside he understands and knows that it is wrong. That's the point. Doesn't personality see that actors are in front of it? It does see. Doesn't it feel that under the cover of true words, it is being enslaved? It does feel.
Yes, and here a person should ask himself a question. For whom do I implement this program? And why do I do this? If I thus create a problem for myself. In fact, these are merely desires from consciousness. It's a thirst for power, a thirst to be like everyone else. Again, to dominate someone, to mean something in this world.
Note, to mean something in this world. Again, we return to a person who has gained spiritual freedom. Does he have a desire to mean anything in this world?
It is actually just the opposite. It's better to be invisible to the system, but to be visible from the spiritual side to the spiritual world.
That's right. In other words, only in what relates to the service.
Right.
Personality does feel how to act right, while the system logically justifies why this is wrong. The system is a liar, and only inside yourself can you distinguish truth from lies, only at the level of perception through the deepest feelings.
Imagine, there is a path of 3 steps and a door to paradise. However, this path is covered with thorns. You have to walk it with your earthly feet, but you have enough strength to take 3 steps and afterwards you don't need feet. Yet, sparing his feet, a human spends his entire life so as not to take these 3 steps, but to go around faraway mountains and to try to enter from another side. However, the trouble is that this path is so long that you will not cover even a quarter of it during your lifetime. Why? Because you spare your feet. After all, they are earthly, they are sort of yours. As long as a person perceives them as his own feet, he will keep sparing them. But when a person realizes that they are like wheels in a car, sooner or later they will wear out. He will always take these 3 steps when he feels the spiritual world is impossible to deceive him. Then no liar will be able to tell him fairy tales. And even if he tells them, this person won't believe in them.
Igor Mikhailovich, we would also like to cover such a question. Is there any difference between intuitive perception of the world and perception through the deepest feelings? By intuitive perception, what people call subconscious is meant here.
That's an interesting question. Why? Because people often confuse it. The difference is huge. As a rule, intuitive perception of the world occurs at the level of primary consciousness. And more often it happens. It can really happen with a shift in time, with greater understanding. But these are hints from the system. But when a person perceives from the position of personality, meaning through the deepest feelings, he perceives a holistic picture. He doesn't perceive it fragmentarily, as at the level of intuitive perception. For instance, a person is walking and realizes that now, around that very corner, he will meet someone whom he hasn't seen for a long time. And it really happens. Many people encounter this phenomenon, and it is difficult to explain it otherwise than by means of some kind of intuition, some kind of magic or predictions or something else. This is actually magic which, in fact, comes from the system. The system sometimes throws to a person such, let's say, magical manifestations, so that a person would think over the fact that he has some kind of magic power and would spend his vital force on developing these abilities in himself, or simply put, on digging a deeper grave for himself. But when a person is in contact with the spiritual world, through the deepest feelings, he perceives himself as a personality, free from consciousness, and at this moment, an understanding comes to him that right now, around the corner, he will meet a person. Well, first of all, he will understand, holistically, who this person is, why the system sent him and what for. Some people may counter, why exactly the system? Why cannot, for instance, the spiritual world send him? Here I will reply to this question for the seekers of answers with the help of consciousness, in such a way that if 2 people with developed personalities, with mature personalities, that speaking human language constantly abide in contact with the spiritual world by means of the deepest feelings, they will know about it long in advance. It will no longer be news that they will meet there around the corner, because they are in contact with each other anyway. In this world, everything is divided. I'll repeat once again. Here, an accidental encounter which supposedly your subconsciousness has hinted you at, again, your subconsciousness in quotes, that you will meet there, it looks magical. While from the position of exactly a developed personality, and a developed personality is the one that is in incessant contact with the spiritual world, meaning when a person already lives, when his body is still alive and being in the body, he's already an immortal being, or the one whom in religion they call angels. Well, they are called differently in different religions. For us, in modern world, this understanding is closer the understanding of what an angel is. When a person is already an angel, while being in this world, he doesn't need to use magic to know where another angel is. I think it will be clearer this way, because here everything is divided, while there everything is united.
At that, there are people who have spontaneous, extrasensory abilities, but they often lack knowledge and understanding of where they actually spend their powers, what they invest their attention in, because consciousness, as a rule, narrows their point of perception down to the area of some kind of their personal local conflict in three-dimensionality.
Again, touching on the subject of magic, or that which is called extrasensory perception, no matter what we call it, magic is magic. It is the use of spiritual powers for influencing the material world. There are indeed people in whom extrasensory abilities begin to unfold spontaneously, and people often just start using them. Some of them do not even want anything for themselves, they sort of help other people. But the use of magic powers in the material world, not for serving the spiritual world, always ends in the same way. This should be known and understood. After all, any person who even has this gift, and many people experience this, we know it from history as well, they didn't use these powers. While possessing them, they didn't use them understanding what this leads to. This is interference in three-dimensionality. Yet many crave for that. The system always pushes people onto the path of magic, again of secret power, force, and everything else, all these earthly desires. People whom the system itself urges to possess magic serve their consciousness. This is precisely the path of lies, because any manifestation of magic in three-dimensionality is nothing but an intensive, obtrusive manifestation of illusion.
Well, yes. Magic is like a trap for attention, like a mousetrap with free cheese.
Absolutely right. Why does the system reveal it all, and why does it allow all this? Only in order to provoke any emotion in you. An emotion of pridefulness or anger towards a person who is now discussing you and the like. But when you do not give in to this, it all passes by, and you understand perfectly well that this is merely consciousness. When you understand and know this, you don't even want to pay attention to it.
Yes, provocations of consciousness mostly begin with a desire, generated by an emotional surge at that, as a rule, based on pridefulness. Once you have clung to something with your attention, that is, have chosen a point of application of action.
When you are ready to open up to consciousness, to the system attacks you. It cannot be otherwise. It always exerts a certain pressure as soon as you have slackened. Where you have slackened, that's the very spot it has pressed into. Consciousness, which is a part of the whole system, actually begins to echo inside you in unison, meaning to provoke an emotional reaction in you in response, so that you would shift the power of attention and spend it precisely on something empty and temporary. Thus, you actually abandon the path leading to the spiritual world.
Yet, why every time do there appear people who strive to possess magic so much, even despite the fact that in human society, from generation to generation, one way or another, through one or another religion, this information about the danger, about the harmfulness of magic is conveyed. It is certainly obvious how the system endeavors to erase the primordial knowledge over time, and the majority of people no longer understand why this must not be done, but on the whole, they at least remember the warnings of their grandfathers and fathers.
People's thirst for magic lies deeply in consciousness, in the system itself. The system always seeks to learn more than it possesses. Therefore, one of the stages, I would even call it not a stage, but a guard through which people pass. Not everyone, but the majority on the spiritual path, it is precisely these paranormal abilities, which a person unexpectedly begins to notice in himself. What do many people do? They start using them and get carried away. And what happens? Instead of taking 3 steps towards the open door to the spiritual world, they go very far away in the opposite direction.
Yes, and when one has a personal experience, I would even say not the most pleasant experience of facing this guard. One understands everything that you are now saying, how weighty it is, how significant and truthful, and that a lot more is concealed in it than we hear. This guard, this primary stage of going through this phenomenon, the beginning of spontaneous manifestation of magic abilities, it is not just felt. It is when you walk around, see and understand what people around want, what they talk about and what they think about right away, all this dirt and absurdity, and you see what they will do in the next moment. It is felt that this is imposed on them by consciousness and what is happening to their personalities at this time. After all, personalities of these people are like babies pushed into a corner, to whom a movie is being shown while they believe in this lie of the system. It's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant, and the first thing you feel when these abilities unfold, it's rejection and unwillingness to listen to consciousness at all, because you understand that this is some illusion and ravings that are merely imposed stereotypically for manipulation. And you understand that when many people crave for magic, they actually don't quite understand what they crave for, what they sign up for, and what a terrible sentence they pass on to themselves. It is unpleasant and it is filthy, and it's better not to even see it and not to know such an experience. Because if you focus your attention on that, you immediately feel how the pressure from the system upon you begins to increase, and the system immediately starts loading you up. It's like a pressing informational mass, overloaded like it is overloaded with emptiness. And this state is intolerable. It is like unpleasant burning.
This may be compared to a dust storm. The one who has been in a desert during a dust storm will understand this. By associations, it happens similarly to a state when it's impossible to breathe, it is burning, it's unpleasant, and you just want to hide somewhere. People go through these states, and what is good in these abilities? In fact,
nothing. It just feels like something dead and smells like death.
Absolutely right. But again, if we look deeper into this issue, then it is obvious that while being in service, some people do possess certain powers which enable them to interfere this way. But is it them who do these deeds? No. They do it with the Holy Spirit, although many psychics say that according to God's will, with the Holy Spirit, but in actual fact, it's exactly the opposite. They mirror these powers and use them for what is dead and for basic needs. Yet, can a spiritually free person use these powers for his own benefit or for the benefit of another person? He cannot. Representatives of the spiritual world are the ones who can interfere, but they interfere not of their own will. That's precisely the will of the one who implements through them. A spiritually free person will never use these powers for himself personally or for another person or for his organization or for anything else. No. This may concern only the spiritual world, merely its interests in this world, nothing more than that. There is a very subtle line here. Consciousness will tell people that you actually try to acquire or use these extrasensory abilities not for yourself, but you do it for the spiritual world and so on. Yet what is being suggested that you do? Because it is always suggested. To influence a particular person, to influence some specific situation, for what purpose? To improve what? And everything always boils down to a material point. Well, everything that boils down to a material point, to the interest of any individual, either to yourself or to your authoritative teacher, or to some organization, or to something else, it is nothing else but magic. Whereas, if these powers are used by those who serve the spiritual world, they're used only for global purposes, nothing more, but there are no interests of any persons, any organizations, or anything else, so the difference is tremendous. That's when it comes to the interest of the spiritual world. These phenomena are extremely rare, but they do happen.
Many people do not even understand what global purposes are. For many, at most, it means to stop a war in three-dimensionality. And a lot of people dream, or rather their consciousness creates for them images of themselves as heroes and offers them a thought that if they possessed such magic power, they would do that. Again, this is a stereotypical way of thinking, which a person has merely copied from society's movie collection, from television, or has learned from mass media.
In order to stop a war, you can use tools of three-dimensionality. Powers are not used in order to influence, let's say, the choice of other people in one or another issue. There is the freedom of choice, including in what relates to wars or something else. You have tongues, so speak, communicate. Everything is simple. It is not gods who start wars, it is people, and people are the ones to end them. Yet, when an issue is much more global, such as issues relating to survival of the entire humanity, in that case, there may be certain interferences from outside, let's say, from the spiritual world, but this applies only to the entire humanity as a whole and its future existence, and by no means to smaller issues. Although consciousness can also tell here where you're sitting in meditation and trying to influence the whole world so that they become better. Become better yourself, become freer yourself, because you should start first of all with yourself. When you become such a person as you want the rest of people to be, that's when you will teach them the same as well.
Yes, one should work on oneself.
Of course, on oneself. It is pointless to work on a neighbor. It won't help. A neighbor might even become free, but it will not make you feel any better.
Yes, in our three-dimensional life, we regard all sorts of things as important, some kinds of achievements, some kinds of aspirations, but all this is in three-dimensionality. We just waste our time on illusion, on perishable things. However, is this really important for us? No, it's important for consciousness. But consciousness is not us. It only seems to us that consciousness is us. That's the point. This is exactly what magic from consciousness is, when consciousness substitutes understanding at the core. It's like in hypnosis. Here you are an ordinary person and then you are already a famous singer. So magic from consciousness is desires from pridefulness, unimplemented in three-dimensionality. It's a thirst for significance, for achievements of greatness in three-dimensionality. These are merely desires of consciousness. But where are you as a human? After all, any personality is inherently great, because it is potentially alive.
Yes, that's why knowledge is always simple. The true, pure knowledge is always simple. It is accessible. It is open. But consciousness doesn't perceive it well. Why? Because knowledge scares it. Hence, consciousness starts doing everything possible so that a person would forget it. We also said it more than once that having gained a certain spiritual experience, after a day or two a person forgets what he has understood. Why does this happen? Consciousness is like a guard. It does everything to retain its power over personality. That's the point, and it always fragments and complicates things.
Yes, consciousness erases genuine spiritual knowledge a great deal. After all, it really exposes the system in yourself. It just tears the masks off the system and uncovers its true essence. Certainly, for the system itself, it's not beneficial to lose control over those people whom it has been exploiting for many years, whom it has been raising in the grip of its patterns. systems corrals for attention, on the hooks of emotional states and conjectures from the mind.
Yes. As for spiritual knowledge, consciousness erases it right away, doesn't remember it. If you don't remind it of that earnestly, of course.
Yes, while some rubbish, some fragment of a movie that you watched 10 years ago, or an episode of a soap opera, when for many hours you were mindlessly sitting in front of a TV set for nothing, simply hanging on the hook of the system's intrigues. Here, by all means, the actors will immediately reproduce that in your head in all bright colors of emotions and intimate details. Why? Because it is beneficial for the system to hold you on a leash of images of three-dimensionality, forcing you to invest the power of your attention in nourishment of the system. And the main thing is that you have chosen this yourself.
Yes, and it's an interesting comparison because people watch TV series from the system for many hours and sometimes even years. For hours, they talk about trifles on the phone, spend a lot of time squabbling about who dominates over whom. For days, they talk in their minds with other people, trying to prove something to them. That is, how much time do they spend on becoming dead? And how much time do they spend on becoming alive? It is interesting that this unique video has been going on for several hours already. But only those people who are really steadfast in their decision to become alive will watch it to the end. And such people will not only watch it to the end, but they will repeatedly return to it. And with every new cycle, they will grow in their inner awareness, in perception through the deepest feelings, and their spirit will be reinforced and become stronger.
Absolutely right. For instance, a person is following the spiritual path of development. He seems to understand something and begins to feel a certain degree of freedom, and at some point in time he is distracted by something, and here consciousness rearranges everything in its own way, and instead of building his future in the spiritual boundless world, a person starts building temporary castles, a territory for his comfort. He starts building a place where he can manifest his power. Yet why? A simple question. Consciousness wants it to be so. At that time, a person doesn't even think about what he will pay for that. He is enjoying and living now, but he is living by illusions. There is a point here as well. The guard is the guard precisely so as to let through the worthy ones. But again, what do we come to? To people's choice. People themselves want it to complicate their existence. Well, they have complicated it, and they have complicated it to such an extent that now it is extremely difficult to break away from the fetters of their own consciousness. Well, on the other hand, the more difficult was the fight, the more well-deserved is the victory. This is right too. What is magic? It is the use of your chance to gain eternal life, to become a part of the spiritual world. This very power you use to get temporary, empty and needless things. Magic is used by people in everyday life very frequently, and people don't notice this. When a person curses someone, when he hates him and wishes evil, this is already a part of magic. This should be known and understood when a person comes to some temple for communication with God, but asks for the health of his body or for that of his relatives and close people. This is also magic. When a person asks for wealth or resolution of some problem in the material world, this is magic too. Everything that relates to fulfillment in three-dimensionality of some human desires, again relating to everything material, all this is magic. A person wastes those vital forces that should be directed to perception through feelings, to the contact with the spiritual world. A person wastes them on material wealth, on fulfillment of his own desires. Consciousness is a good tool, a necessary tool, but a tool, let's say, with its own temperament. I will give a simple example. In India, they use elephants. Many people know from movies how they carry logs on their tusks and the like. But one should understand that an elephant identifies itself. It has a well-developed consciousness, a well-developed memory. And at any moment, just like a bear, it can become aggressive and attack, although since its childhood it has been brought up to be nice and obedient. Human consciousness is the same. It is like that elephant or that bear. On the one hand, it is obedient, executes commands, but it can always attack. Therefore, one should understand this, know this, and let's say there is such an expression, to keep it on a tight leash. The very process of desiring is already nothing else but a magic activity, especially when people already imagine the end result, let's say of that very meeting tomorrow. Meaning games of consciousness. People don't understand that at this moment your consciousness is in contact with his consciousness. Although the person doesn't notice that, and the consciousnesses of both of you are already making a certain decision. As a rule, they make a decision that is essential for the system. But the result is always predetermined. Yet, when you haven't played out a scenario, you haven't engaged in magic, you are free in this case. And here you have many more chances to win the argument. And this is not magic. This is truth. Why? Because the system is not prepared for your action. Consciousness is like a guard. It does everything to retain its power over personality. That's the point. And it always fragments and complicates things. As soon as it finds a weak side in a human being, for instance, a person follows the spiritual path of development and begins to feel a certain degree of freedom, and at some point in time he is distracted by something, and here consciousness rearranges everything in its own way, and the person, instead of building his future in the spiritual boundless world, he starts building temporary castles, a territory for his comfort. He starts building a place where he can manifest his power. Yet why? A simple question. Consciousness wants it to be so. At this time, a person doesn't even think about what he will pay for that. He is enjoying and living now, but he is living by illusions. The guard is the guard precisely so as to let through the worthy ones. But again, what do we come to? To people's choice. People themselves wanted to complicate their existence. Well, they have complicated it. On the other hand, the more difficult was the fight, the more well-deserved is the victory.
From the perspective of the spiritual world, all people are united. They are even closer than close relatives. But from the perspective of consciousness, all people are divided. They are hostile to each other, even close relatives. Until a person rids himself of the dictatorship of consciousness, he will not find reconciliation and freedom within himself. For anyone who divides is a servant of the devil, while the devil is the only enemy of humankind. This video will change the future, because this truth is searched for by everyone, those who trample on death for the sake of life, those who expose lies for the sake of truth, those who yearn for salvation in spirit, those who for the sake of boundless love seek God and immensely love Him. Spiritual will changes everything, whatever plans the system might build. The one who is in spirit is with spirit. The one who is with spirit is with God. The book AllatRa gave a powerful impulse. It begot a movement, and many people around the world discovered for themselves the knowledge concealed in millennia. And many people, thanks to AllatRa, have been gaining spirit, secretly studying the path that leads to God. Yet fear and disagreement still prevailed in their heads, fear and disagreement coming from the mind, from lies of the system. Many thanks to Igor Mikhailovich for this real opportunity to come into contact with the spiritual world in practice, to expose in oneself the inevitably dead, to find and develop oneself in the eternally alive. For the knowledge that is given now in this alive conversation will change the world, and this is inevitable. This knowledge will liberate a great number of people from the system's fetters. Masks will fall off many people. The shackles and chains of their consciousness will come off, and many people will expose the system's face in their minds. And the devil will have nowhere to hide in the minds of people, for his mask is torn off, and he is exposed. Everyone who explores themselves can see his thoughts and his deeds in their heads, distinguish in themselves temporary from eternal, mortal from alive, and find their real self and gain eternal happiness. For the knowledge that is given today has separated black from white, and there will be no more gray. Many people will come to know the essence, the truth will be revealed to them, and they will carry this word on. For the spirit of freedom and infinite God's love will be much stronger in them than servility before the consciousness of Satan's servants. Although the system will resist the truth through its slaves, this will be pointless. For a person will already know that anyone who blasphemes the truth is a mortal slave of Satan. Every day people will grow in understanding, and many people will be glorified in the spirit of truth and deepen in cognition, and many will reunite with the spiritual world during their lifetime. This will change the future, and the system's plans will collapse. Because whatever plans the system would make, by their choice, people will change everything. For those who are free in spirit are also free in words, for their life is in God and not in the slavery of Satan. What has been said will go around the world and change it, and billions of seekers will join millions of those who have come to know the essence. Thus, understanding the essence, people will expose this system. They will understand that the real enemy is not another person. The real enemy is the system. For the devil divides, while the spirit unites. This will change people's understanding all over the world. This will make the world of people open. This will unite nations into one big family, and freedom of spirit will reign among them. This is the end of the devil's rule over people, and the beginning of the spiritual future of humanity. This is the end of the darkness of consciousness. People will unite in the name of spiritual freedom, love, and truth. This will really lead to world peace, no matter how much the system resists. And the darkness will dissipate, and the sun will shine at the peak of the world, the sign that has returned the truth to people, the sign that dispels the darkness of consciousness, the sign that embodies the union of a human being with God. Then people will know that the human enemy is defeated, and the spirit of unity of the spiritual world will reign in everyone who gains it. People will attain peace in themselves, peace in God. And everyone will become a witness of a new understanding, and this will change everything. Humanity still has to go through a lot, but this no longer matters when you live in God's love. The system's illusion has no power over you, because God lives in you.